The stars above the border lanes always looked sharper when you were running from something. Corin Vale leaned against the rusted frame of his shuttle's cockpit, watching the cold gleam of the Athatheran patrols on the scanners. They moved. Like sharks through dark water, hungry for smugglers like him, the kind of man who once moved contraband for a living and now pretended he was doing something nobler. Pretending made it easier to sleep. The distress beacon had been weak, just a dying pulse hidden in static. He should have ignored it. His old self, the one who cared only about the next payday, would have. But the beacon reminded him of another signal, years ago, one he hadn't reached in time. A small transport ambushed by raiders. A screaming child's voice cutting through comms before going silent. He still woke some nights hearing that voice. Maybe that was why he cut power and coasted toward the derelict barge now drifting in a forgotten stretch of space, his gut already telling him this would get him killed. The barge looked half-eaten, its hull torn apart like paper. Inside, silence. No movement. Just the stale smell of recycled air and the metallic tang of fear. He moved through the corridors with a hand on his blaster, boots ringing hollow on the deck, until he heard it, a sound so soft it barely registered. A whimper. Then another dot. She was curled in the corner of a cargo bay, knees drawn up to her chest, skin glowing faintly in shades of silver and pale rose. Athatheran. Not just any Athatheran either. Her luminescence was too pure, too precise, as if every flicker of light across her skin meant something. Big eyes, the color of dark water, stared at him without fear or trust. Just a strange, silent question. "Hey, kid," Corin said softly, crouching down. His voice, rough from too many years of shouting over engines and gunfire, sounded almost gentle. "You alone here?" She didn't answer. Just tilted her head and whispered, "Bells." The word was clear, but her voice was distant, like she wasn't sure she was awake. Bells and gardens. It took him a moment to process that. A dream? A memory? He reached out, careful not to startle her. "Come on, let's get you out of this tomb." She flinched at first, but when he offered his hand again, she slid her small fingers into his. Corin didn't know what kind of hell this kid had survived, but he knew one thing: leaving her here wasn't an option. He carried her back to his shuttle, glancing over his shoulder every few steps, as if the dead ship might suddenly come alive to stop him. When he scanned the barge's origin data, his stomach tightened. The route led straight from Athatheran Royal sectors, the kind of place where a human smuggler caught with a child like this would be executed before anyone asked questions. And the patrols, there were more of them than usual, weaving across the border lanes, hunting for something. He strapped the girl into the co-pilot seat. She looked too small there, dwarfed by the cracked leather and scratched metal. "You got a name?" he asked, but she only shook her head, her skin flickering with patterns he couldn't read. Maybe she didn't know her name. Maybe no one ever told her. Corin fired the engines, feeling that old rush of danger crawl up his spine. He wasn't sure if he was rescuing her or just dragging her into his own storm. But as the ship broke free of the barge shadow and the stars opened wide before them, he made a silent promise. This time, he wouldn't fail the kid. Not this one. And deep down, he sensed this was no ordinary rescue. The universe had just dropped something on his lap, something bigger than smuggling, bigger than him. He saw it in the way her luminous skin shimmered like royal insignias he'd once seen carved in palace halls. Someone was going to want her back, and they would tear apart every border lane to find her. "Hold on tight, kid," he muttered, hands tightening on the controls as warning lights lit up. "We're in for a rough ride." The palace of Athatheran Prime never slept. Even in the quiet hours, when the twin moons bled silver light across the marble terraces, the spires pulsed with subtle luminescent patterns, a language of the crown, whispering decrees and secrets. To the stars. Queen Saraphina stood alone on the highest balcony, her skin casting soft waves of gold and blue that rippled like distant tides. The palace bells had not rung in years, not since the day her daughter vanished. The official stories called it a tragedy of war, the kind that even queens cannot prevent. A rebel faction, desperate to destabilize the empire, had ambushed the royal convoy and set fire to the sky with stolen plasma cannons. When the wreckage was retrieved, there was no sign of the infant princess, just shattered crystal cradles and the charred remains of those sworn to protect her. Seraphina had not wept in public, not once. A queen's tears were too costly. But in the quiet of the balcony, where the stars could not betray her, she grieved as fiercely as the day she first learned of the loss. Tonight, that grief stirred again. A whisper had reached her throne room, a fragment of intelligence from the outer territories. A human vessel had been spotted near a derelict Athatheran barge carrying a young child who glowed with royal colors. Her advisors dismissed it as coincidence. Humans traffic children, after all. It wouldn't be the first time a smuggler got his hands on something sacred. But Seraphina's instincts were older than politics. Something in her soul ignited when she heard the report, like the faint chime of distant bells. "Your Majesty," said Lord Keller, her High Chancellor, bowing deeply. His skin shimmered in muted silvers, the tones of cautious diplomacy. "We've confirmed the vessel's ID, a human freighter, old, patched together with stolen hull plates. The pilot is known among border patrols, a smuggler named Corin Vale. We suspect contraband. We recommend intercepting and seizing the cargo." Seraphina turned slowly, her gaze sharp as polished crystal. "Seizing the cargo?" she asked, her voice quiet but cutting. "You speak of a child." Keller hesitated. "If the reports are accurate, Majesty, it may not be what it seems. Humans lie. They steal. If they have taken an Athatheran child, then I will see her returned." Seraphina interrupted, her tone soft but commanding. Her light shifted to a deep, steady gold, the color of finality. "Send word to the border fleets. Bring the smuggler to me, alive. If he resists, disable his vessel, but do not harm the child. If she is who I believe she might be, her." Words trailed off, but the unspoken truth burned in her chest. She might finally see her daughter again. As the High Chancellor withdrew, Seraphina stepped back into her private chambers. She sat before a mirror of obsidian glass, tracing her reflection with a hand that trembled just slightly. It had been nearly a decade, but she still remembered every detail of the child she lost, the pale gleam of her skin, the tiny flickers of pink light that danced when she laughed, the way she reached for the palace bells when they chimed. "Could it be you?" Seraphina whispered to the night. "Could you have survived all this time?" Outside, the border lanes were tightening like a noose. Corin Vale's ship was already being hunted. The human didn't know it yet, but he was carrying something that could change the balance of power between species, something worth more than every credit in the galaxy. The girl in his care wasn't just a lost child. She might be the last missing piece of a fractured empire. Seraphina rose from her seat, the weight of destiny pressing against her shoulders. "Prepare the royal flagship," she told her attendants. "If this human smuggler has my daughter, I will face him myself." Far from the palace, Corin's freighter streaked through the void, its battered engines leaving faint trails of ionized gas. Inside the cockpit, Leva sat in the co-pilot's chair, humming softly to herself, a sound like glass chimes in a summer breeze. Corin glanced at her, a strange unease coiling in his chest. "Kid," he muttered, rubbing his jaw. "Who are you?" "Really?" But Leva just looked up with those wide, luminous eyes and said, "The bells are coming." Corin didn't know what that meant, but as the scanner lit up with approaching ships, he knew one thing for certain: they were running out of time. The stars over the border lanes were not kind that night. Corin Vale could feel it in the way his ship hummed, a strained, uneven sound that told him the engines didn't like being pushed this hard. The old freighter had survived pirate ambushes and smuggling runs through debris fields, but Athatheran patrols were different. They were faster, sharper, and they didn't forgive trespassers, especially humans carrying something they had no right to. Corin tightened his grip on the control sticks and checked the scanners again. 3 ships, no 4 now. Their transponder signals were Athatheran Royal codes. He swore under his breath. A smuggler's life was about knowing when to fight and when to vanish, but with a child on board, disappearing into the void wasn't an option. Leva sat quietly in the co-pilot's chair, her small legs dangling off the edge. She was tracing circles in the air with her glowing fingers, patterns of soft pink and silver light that shimmered like floating glyphs. Corin had seen a lot of strange things in his years at the edge of civilization, creatures that breathed ammonia, traders with 6 tongues, mercenaries with eyes like molten gold, but nothing like this girl. Her luminescence wasn't random. It pulsed in rhythms like coded messages or ceremonial patterns. Every time she did it, it made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. "Kid," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "you sure? You don't remember where you came from? No name? No family?" "Nothing." She looked at him, head tilted slightly, and said the same thing she'd said 3 times now. "Bells, gardens, they were singing," Corin sighed. "Yeah, well, bells. And gardens aren't going to keep us alive when those ships catch up." A warning alarm blared, a proximity alert. He slammed the control panel shut, muttering a string of curses. They were being scanned. The Athatherans had locked onto them. It was only a matter of time before they tried to board. Corin thought about his past, about the raid he'd failed years ago. A little boy, screaming as the ship burned, his cries drowned by the chaos of blaster fire. Corin had gotten out alive, but the boy hadn't. That failure had followed him, a ghost he could never shake. Maybe that was why he couldn't leave this girl behind. Maybe this was his second chance to do something right. The console blinked with incoming signals. The Athatherans were hailing him. Corin ignored the call, his mind racing. He had one last trick, a hidden smuggler's lane near the nebula. It was a risky path, filled with magnetic storms that could tear his ship apart, but it was better than being captured. He flicked the switches, setting the nav system to manual. The ship jolted violently as it veered toward the storm. Leva gasped, clutching the armrest. Her luminescence flared, a sudden cascade of colors that danced across the cockpit. For a moment, Corin froze. The pattern she was projecting looked almost familiar. He'd seen them once, years ago, during a delivery to an Athatheran outpost. They were royal insignia symbols reserved for the highest bloodlines. "What the hell are you, kid?" Corin muttered, his voice almost lost in the roar of the engines. The comms crackled. A voice came through, cold and commanding. "Unidentified human vessel, this is the Athatheran Royal Fleet. You are in possession of stolen property. Cut engines and prepare to be boarded." Corin's jaw tightened. Stolen property. They meant Leva. His hand hovered over the throttle. He could surrender, hope they'd take the girl and spare his life. But one look at her, so small, her eyes wide with trust, and he knew he couldn't hand her over. "Not this time," he muttered. "I'm not failing another kid." He slammed the throttle forward. The ship dove into the heart of the nebula, lightning like plasma streaking across the viewports. The comms exploded with warning signals, the ship's hull screaming under the stress. Leva clutched his arm, her tiny hand glowing against his scarred skin. "Hold on," he said, forcing the ship through the storm. We're going dark. No one's taking you. Not them, not anyone. But deep in the nebula, where sensors flickered and static filled the comms, Corin couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Something bigger was unfolding. And this child, this girl with her luminous skin and haunting memories of bells, was at the center of it all. The Athatheran palace was alive with quiet tension, its crystalline walls resonating with faint pulses of blue and silver light, the Empire's language of thought and emotion. Word had spread across the royal court like wildfire. The Queen herself had taken command of the pursuit. Saraphina rarely left the inner sanctum of her palace, but tonight she stood at the helm of her flagship, the Celestial Vale, its hull a living sculpture of glassy metal and soft luminescence that shimmered. Like moonlight on water dots, she stared out at the stars, her expression calm but unyielding, though beneath that poise burned a storm of hope and fear. Every instinct told her the reports were not lies. The child seen with the human smuggler glowing in patterns of pale rose and white could only belong to the royal bloodline. She could feel it in her marrow, the same way a mother knows her child's laughter without needing to see their face. "Your Majesty," said Lord Keller, his tone clipped and cautious. "The human freighter has vanished into the Verelian Nebula. It's madness. The storms there will rip his hull apart. Should we not wait for him to emerge?" Seraphina's luminescence shifted to a pale, icy silver. "No, he will not die there. A man who carries my child will not give her up so easily. If he survived this long, the nebula will not be the end of him. Prepare the intercept routes. I will not wait." As the fleet moved, rumors rippled through the lower decks of the Celestial Vale. It was said the Queen was chasing a ghost from her past. Some whispered of the lost princess and heir presumed dead. The political vultures of the court could already sense the coming storm. If the princess had indeed survived, her return could rewrite every line of succession and power. Not everyone wanted that outcome. Seraphina knew it too. There were traitors in her court, those who had grown comfortable in her grief, who preferred the throne without an heir to challenge their influence. She had spent years keeping her suspicions buried, but now the whispers of treachery grew louder. If this human smuggler had truly found her daughter, then forces within her own palace would do anything to ensure the child never reached home. Far beyond the palace and its schemes, Corin Vale was wrestling his battered ship through the final currents of the nebula. The controls sparked under his hands, heat searing his palms, but he didn't let go. "Stay together," he growled, almost to himself as much as to the ship. He glanced at Leva, who was staring at the storm beyond a viewport. She wasn't afraid. In fact, she looked almost entranced. The violent plasma arcs reflected in her eyes like a memory calling her home. "Kid," Corin said, trying to sound firm, "when we get through this, I'm dropping you somewhere safe, you hear me? Somewhere far away from all these people chasing." "U.S." She tilted her head, that soft glow rippling across her skin. "The bells are calling," she murmured. "We can't run from the bells." Corin's jaw tightened. He didn't understand half of what she meant, but a cold weight settled in his gut. Something told him this wasn't just about a runaway child. This girl meant something to the Athatherans, something big enough to kill for. He powered through the last wave of plasma and burst into clear space and froze. A fleet of ships waited for them like a trap sprung tight. The Celestial Vow was at the center, its shimmering silhouette unmistakable. Corin's hand hovered over the hyperdrive controls, but even as he calculated the jump, he knew he'd never get the coordinates in time. They'd close in before he could spool the engines. He could already hear the voice on the comms, sharp and commanding. "Human vessel, you are trespassing in sovereign space. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Do not resist, or you and your ship will be reduced to fragments." Corin cursed under his breath. His options were dwindling fast. He could run and risk the girl being caught in a crossfire, or surrender and hope to keep her safe. His past screamed at him to run, but one look at Leva, her glowing hand reaching for his, told him there was only one choice he could live with. "Hang on," he muttered, flipping the ship into a slow approach. He cut the engines, but he wasn't done. Not yet. He'd find a way to survive this. He had to. Aboard the Celestial Vow, Saraphina felt her heart hammer as she watched the human ship drift closer. Through the viewport, she glimpsed the child. At his side, and for the first time in years, the Queen's composure cracked. The glow of that child's skin, the patterns of light, were unmistakable. It was her. But just as hope surged in her chest, a warning blared through her flagship: sabotage, internal systems failing. Someone inside her own ship was trying to interfere. With the boarding operation, the enemy wasn't just out there. They were among her own. The real battle, Saraphina realized, had just begun. The docking clamps of the Celestial Vow snapped onto Corin Vale's freighter with a force that rattled every bolt in the hull. The sound reverberated through the metal like a death knell. Corin's hand instinctively went to the sidearm strapped to his thigh. He wasn't stupid. Fighting the Athatheran Royal Guard was suicide, but if they so much as twitched wrong toward Leva, they'd have to drag him out of this cockpit over his dead body. The hatch hissed open, flooding his ship with pale, crystalline light. 5 Athatheran guards stepped aboard, their armor sculpted from living crystal that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Their eyes were cold, faceless behind mirrored masks. Behind them, like a vision carved from light itself, walked Queen Saraphina. Corin froze, his breath catching for just a second. He'd seen holas of her before, the galaxy's most formidable monarch, always radiant, always untouchable, but standing here in person, with her luminous skin flowing through hues of gold and pale blue like living fire, she looked more like a force of nature than a woman. He'd expected wrath, cold command. He hadn't expected sorrow. Saraphina's gaze landed on Leva. The child's glow intensified, responding instinctively to the Queen's presence. The moment their eyes met, the air seemed to tighten, as if the entire universe had drawn in a breath and was waiting to see what would happen next. "Where did you find her?" Saraphina's voice was calm, but the undercurrent of emotion trembled. Through every syllable, Corin's hand flexed near his weapon. "On a wreck drifting near the border. No survivors except her." "She is not yours to keep," Saraphina said softly, her luminescence rippling with pale gold. "She is Athatheran blood." Corin's jaw hardened. "She's a kid, not a piece of cargo. She was starving when I found her. Scared. If you think I'm just handing her over, you're wrong." The guards shifted, tense, but Saraphina raised a hand, halting them. Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "Do you know who she is? Do you understand what you've brought into your care?" "All I know is that she dreams about bells and gardens," Corin said. "If she's yours, if you're her family, then fine. But I'm not letting anyone treat her like a trophy or a bargaining chip." Before Saraphina could reply, a sudden blast rocked the Celestial Vow. The ship's alarms blared, a piercing shriek of warning. The deck shuddered beneath their feet. One of the guards staggered, catching themselves on the wall. Saraphina's expression sharpened instantly. "What was that?" Corin barked, looking between the guards. "Sabotage," one of them said. "Internal systems have been breached." Saraphina's skin flared with alarmed hues of crimson and white. She turned to her captain, her voice like a blade. "Find the traitors. Seal every corridor." In that chaos, Leva slipped off the co-pilot's seat and clung to Corin's hand. Her glow flared again, flickering like a pulse of warning. She whispered, "They're coming." "Who's coming, kid?" Corin asked, crouching to her level. "The Dark Ones," she said, voice trembling. "The ones who took me away." Corin's stomach sank. This wasn't just palace politics. Someone out there wanted this kid gone, and they were willing to blow apart a royal flagship to make it happen. Saraphina knelt beside Leva, her expression cracking for the first time. She touched the child's cheek with trembling fingers. "I know you," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I know your light," Leva blinked, tilting her head. "Bells," she said softly. "You're the one who sang the bells." Tears welled in Saraphina's eyes, a sight that stunned. "Everyone in the room?" "Yes," she whispered, "I am." Before anyone could absorb the moment, a second explosion thundered through the hull. The lights flickered. Through the viewport, Corin saw smaller attack ships swarming like vultures around the Celestial Vow. These weren't royal ships. They were assassins, mercenaries, likely hired by someone inside the court to finish what they started years ago. "Your Majesty, we have to move." One of the guards barked. "They're breaching the hangar." Saraphina stood, regal even amidst chaos. She looked at Corin, her voice firm. "You will help me protect her." Corin raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't planning on sitting this one out." "Good," Saraphina said. "Because if they take her again, the entire empire burns." As the ship's alarm screamed and the attackers closed in, Corin knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. He was in the middle of a war he hadn't even known existed, one that revolved around the child now clutching his hand, and no matter what happened next, he wasn't letting her go. The corridors of the Celestial Vow were chaos incarnate, awash in flashing alarms and the echo of hurried footsteps. Smoke curled through the crystalline halls, casting distorted shadows on the walls as the ship's living architecture strained to heal itself. Corin Vale ran close behind Queen Saraphina and her guards, his pulse pounding in sync with the warning sirens. Leva clung to his arm like a frightened shadow, her tiny hand glowing faintly in frantic patterns that seemed almost to whisper danger. "Who the hell are they?" Corin demanded, glancing at the readouts on a wall panel as they passed. The screens showed hostile crafts latching on to the Celestial Vow like carrion birds, not pirates. Saraphina replied, her voice sharp, her tone laced with steel. "These are assassins, paid killers with inside access." Her light flickered to hues of deep crimson Athatheran colors for fury and grief. "Someone in my court doesn't want this child alive." Corin gritted his teeth. "Guess I just walked into your civil war." Saraphina stopped abruptly and faced him, her gold and silver glow brightening. "This is no civil war, human. This is treason of the highest order. They took her from me once. I will not let them do it again." Leva's small voice broke through the tension. "They're close. I can feel them." She pointed toward a service passage. "Through there. They're coming for us." Saraphina's guards hesitated, glancing uneasily at the girl's glowing patterns. One of them murmured, "Your Majesty, how can she knows." Saraphina cut in, her voice a quiet blade. "Do as she says." They darted into the narrow passage, the hum of the ship's power conduits reverberating underfoot. The passage curved toward a locked chamber, a secure vault meant for diplomatic emergencies. As they sealed the door, the sound of distant explosions rattled the bulkheads. Corin crouched next to Leva, searching her wide, luminous eyes. "Kid, how do you know where they are?" he asked softly. "I remember. When they took me," she whispered. "Their shadows were like knives. I can feel them now, in the walls." Corin's heart clenched. He'd known kids with trauma before, orphans rescued from war zones, children hiding memories they couldn't put into words. But there was something different about Leva. It was as if her blood carried an ancient instinct, one tied to this strange, glowing language her people spoke through light and emotion. Before Corin could say more, The secure chamber shook violently. A muffled voice shouted orders on the other side of the door, and then the distinct whine of a plasma cutter began chewing through the lock. "They found us," Corin said, drawing his blaster. He glanced at Saraphina. "You got a plan?" Her luminous patterns hardened to a fierce, bright white. "I do." She turned to her guards. "Hold the line. Buy us a window." Then to Corin, "Follow me." "Wait, what about the girl?" "She stays with you," Saraphina said. "If I fall, you get her out, no matter what." The guards took their positions as Saraphina led Corin and Leva through a concealed hatch behind the chamber. The passage beyond led to the heart of the ship, the Crown Core, a living crystal that powered the celestial vow and answered only to the Queen's bloodline. When they entered, Corin stopped short. The Crown Core was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was a towering column of translucent energy, glowing in liquid shades of sapphire and gold, with veins of pure light branching out like the roots of a living tree. The air around it hummed with power. Leva's glow intensified, mirroring the core's patterns as if her very blood resonated with the ship. Saraphina noticed. Her breath caught. "You see it too, don't you?" She said to Corin. "See what?" "She's connected to it. The core is responding to her like it would to me." Saraphina dropped to one knee before Leva. "You are my daughter, aren't you? You're the one I lost." Leva blinked, confusion flickering across her face. "I remember the bells," she whispered, "and the gardens." Your voice sang. To me. I thought it was a dream. Seraphina's composure faltered. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and rested her hand on Liva's cheek. The patterns of light across Seraphina's skin merged with the child's, creating a shimmering dance of warmth and recognition. Corin felt something shift in the room, an almost electric current of emotion that wasn't just between mother and daughter. It rippled through him too, as if this moment, this reunion, was something he was meant to witness. But the moment was shattered by a sudden explosion nearby. The assassins had breached the chamber behind them. One of the guards. Voices rang through the comms. "Your Majesty, they're coming through the lower decks." Seraphina rose, eyes blazing with resolve. "Then we make our stand here," she said. She placed her hand on the core, and the ship responded, power surging through its veins like fire. "With the Crown Core and my daughter, we will end this." Corin raised his blaster, jaw set. "Then let's end it." The next wave of intruders was already pounding down the corridors. The final fight for the lost princess and the Empire had begun. The Crown Core chamber was alive with light, the crystalline walls thrumming like the heartbeat of a giant. Every pulse of energy made the shadows outside tremble, as if the celestial vow itself was bracing for war. Corin Vale stood shoulder to shoulder, with Queen Saraphina, his blaster warm and ready, while Leva clung to his side. The child's glow was no longer just a soft shimmer, it blazed, bright and wild, as if she were answering the call of the ship's living heart. The first wave of assassins burst through the corridor, entrance in a rain of sparks. Corin fired. Without hesitation, each shot striking with the precision of a man who'd spent years surviving ambushes in dead zones. Saraphina was no less deadly. Her hands moved like arcs of lightning, manipulating energy fields that slammed intruders into walls or ripped their weapons apart. Her luminescent patterns burned bright white and crimson, a battle sign that spoke of defiance and fury. But they were outnumbered, and the assassins were well coordinated. These weren't ordinary mercenaries. They moved with the discipline of soldiers who'd been trained to fight royalty itself. Corin's mind raced. Who had the power and resources to orchestrate something like this? Whoever it was, they wanted Leva silenced forever. Leva's voice broke through the chaos. "The core is calling," she whispered, tugging at Seraphina's hand. "It's singing for us." Saraphina froze mid-motion, her gaze snapping to the glowing column at the center of the chamber. The crown core was shifting, its patterns changing, mirroring Liva's flickering hues. "She's right," Saraphina breathed. "The core recognizes her bloodline. She can access the ship's inner defenses." Corin ducked behind a console, blasting an assassin who was trying to flank them. "If you've got some secret royal defense grid, now's the time to use it." Saraphina knelt beside Liva, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Listen to me, little one. Place your hand on the core. Think of home. Think of the bells you remember. The ship will answer you." Liva hesitated, but Corin crouched down and met her eyes. "You got this, kid. I'm right here." The girl nodded, trembling, and placed her small glowing hand on the crown core. Instantly, the chamber erupted with light. The core's energy surged outward, sending waves of force rippling through the walls. Outside the chamber, assassins cried out as their weapons fried in their hands and the ship's living architecture sealed off hallways with crystalline barricades. The celestial vow roared to life like an awakened beast, and Corin could feel it. This wasn't just a ship. It was an extension of Saraphina's will, and now Liva's too. The assassins realized too late they were trapped. Saraphina raised her hand, summoning the core's energy, and a cascade of radiant force swept the intruders off their feet, pinning them against the walls like insects caught in amber. When silence fell, the only sound was the hum of the crown core and Liva's soft breathing. She looked up at Saraphina with wide, wondering eyes. "Did I do that?" Saraphina's face softened, and tears slipped down her cheeks, glowing faintly gold. "Yes," she whispered, "you did. Just as I once did when I was your age." The danger had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. Loyal guards stormed into the chamber, dragging the surviving assassins into custody. Lord Keller appeared, his expression pale but resolute. "Your Majesty, the traitors have been identified. Several high-ranking advisors, those who profited from the princess's disappearance, are in chains." This attempt was the last gasp of their conspiracy. Saraphina looked at Liva, then at Corin. "This is no longer just about my throne. It is about rebuilding the empire they tried to break." She turned to Corin. "And you could have run. You could have sold her to the highest bidder. Instead, you stood between her and death. I owe you a debt that cannot be measured." Corin shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't do it for a reward. Just didn't want another kid to end up like—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence, the memory of the boy he'd failed still too raw. Saraphina stepped closer. "Then let me give you something more meaningful. Stay. Serve as protector and advisor, not just to me, but to her." She placed a gentle hand on Liva's shoulder. "She trusts you as if you were part of her family, and so do I." Corin hesitated, staring at the child's hopeful face. For years he drifted from one smuggling job to another, never belonging anywhere, haunted by failures he couldn't undo. But here now, with this girl's hand in his, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. "Yeah," he said finally, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "All right, Your Majesty. Guess? I'm not much of a smuggler anymore." Liva beamed, her glow shifting to soft pink and gold. "Does that mean you're staying with us?" Corin tousled her hair. "Yeah, kid, I'm not going anywhere." The following days were a blur of change. The conspirators were exposed and tried before the court. Word spread across the empire that the lost princess had returned, and the palace bells, silent for nearly a decade, rang once more, their music echoing across the city like a promise of renewal. Liva stood on the palace balcony, holding Saraphina's hand with Corin at her side, as the people cheered and showered the streets below with glimmering petals. That night, as the stars bathed the palace gardens in silver light, Saraphina turned to Corin. The Empire needs people who believe in protecting the helpless, not exploiting them. I want you to lead our new humanitarian ministry, an alliance of species, built to prevent what happened to Leva from ever happening again." Corin raised an eyebrow. "A smuggler turned minister. Can't say I saw that coming." Saraphina smiled, her glow warm and steady. "Life's greatest journeys often begin with impossible circumstances." He glanced down at Leva, who was planting crystal seeds in the garden. She looked up and grinned, and for the first time in years, Corin felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The bells rang again, not for war or mourning, but for a new beginning, one forged by a lost child, a grieving queen, and a human who found a home when he least expected it.